"We're going to need $100,000 by next week," my father announced during Sunday dinner, sliding a business plan across the table with my brother's name on it. The same father who, 3 years earlier, had called my own business idea delusional and refused to even read my proposal. I looked from the sleek portfolio to my brother's expectant face, then to my father's expression of absolute certainty that I would comply. They had no idea what was coming next. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Bradshaw family dinner had always been a weekly tradition, even after I moved into my own apartment in the city. My mother's roast beef, my father's pontificating about the business world, and my younger brother Michael's latest stories about his adventures in finance. These elements were as consistent as the antique grandfather clock that had been keeping time in my parents' dining room for decades. What wasn't consistent was my role in these gatherings. For years, I had been the quiet observer, the dutiful daughter who nodded along to my father's business wisdom, despite running a company that now generated more revenue in a month than his did in a year. I was Eliza Bradshaw, 34 years old, founder, and CEO of Verta Technology, an eco-friendly packaging solutions company that had grown from a concept sketched on coffee shop napkins to an 8-figure business with clients across 3 continents. The journey had been far from easy, marked by rejections, setbacks, and one particularly painful memory of my father dismissing my initial business plan without even reading beyond the executive summary. "The market doesn't need another packaging company, Eliza," he had said, pushing my carefully prepared proposal back across his home office desk, especially not one founded by someone with no industry experience. "Be realistic." That was 3 years and 4 months ago. Now, as I cut into my mother's roast beef, I was calculating the irony of the situation unfolding before me. Michael, my 30-year-old brother who had followed precisely in our father's footsteps, business school, investment banking, the prescribed path, had apparently launched a startup that was already in trouble. The investor pulled out at the last minute, my father explained, his tone suggesting this was a minor inconvenience rather than a catastrophic failure of business planning. But Michael's concept is revolutionary. It's going to transform financial technology as we know it. I took a sip of water, using the moment to compose my thoughts. The business plan my father had slid across the table was for something called CryptoSecure, yet another blockchain-based payment processing platform in an already oversaturated market. A quick glance at the executive summary revealed the same buzzwords and inflated projections I saw in dozens of doomed pitch decks every month. "And you think I should invest in this?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Not invest, exactly," Michael interjected, leaning forward with that charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood. "Think of it as a family loan. Once we secure the next round of funding, you'll get everything back with interest." Our mother looked uncomfortable, pushing food around her plate. She had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over my father's harshness and Michael's entitlement. But even she seemed aware of the breathtaking audacity of this request. "You've done well for yourself, Eliza," my father said, as if acknowledging my success was a generous concession rather than a long overdue recognition. "Your little company has turned out better than I expected. Now it's time to help your brother. Get his foot in the door. That's what family does." "My little company," I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "The one you said would fail within 6 months? The one you refused to even consider supporting?" My father waved his hand dismissively. "The packaging industry was oversaturated. You got lucky with the eco-friendly angle and timing with all the plastic bans. Michael's situation is different. His concept is truly innovative." I looked down, at the business plan again, reading between the lines of the glossy projections. CryptoSecure had already burned through its initial seed funding with minimal product development to show for it. The revolutionary technology described in vague terms was essentially a repackaging of existing blockchain applications. And now, they needed an emergency cash infusion because their primary investor had wisely backed out. What my father and brother didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask, was that I received multiple investment proposals every week. As Verda technology had gained prominence in the sustainable business community, I had become known not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a careful, strategic angel investor who provided both capital and mentorship to promising startups. My portfolio of investments had already produced 2 successful exits and several promising growth trajectories. I also had a strict policy. I never invested in businesses that couldn't provide a working prototype, clear market differentiation, and evidence of customer discovery. CryptoSecure failed on all 3 counts. "I'd need to see more information," I said finally, closing the portfolio. "Financial projections, customer research, competitive analysis, development timeline." Michael exchanged a glance with our father. "We need to move quickly, Eliza. The opportunity window is closing. Other companies are working on similar solutions." "All the more reason to have your documentation in order," I replied. "If you're asking for $100,000, you should be prepared to justify every penny." My father's expression darkened. "This isn't a Shark Tank episode, Eliza. This is family. Michael needs support, not interrogation." And there it was, the double standard that had defined our family dynamic for as long as I could remember. When I had sought support for Verda, I'd been subjected to dismissal without even a cursory review. My ideas weren't worthy of my father's time, let alone his financial backing. But Michael's failing venture deserved unquestioning family loyalty and a blank check. "Family works both ways, Dad," I said quietly. "Where was this attitude when I was starting Verda?" "That was different," he insisted, color rising in his face. "You were being stubborn, refusing to listen to practical advice from people with experience." "People like you," I clarified, "who didn't believe a woman could succeed in industrial manufacturing and distribution. Who thought my sustainable materials research was a hobby, not a business foundation." My mother intervened then, placing her hand gently on my father's arm. "James, perhaps this isn't the right time to discuss business. Eliza just got back from her conference in Singapore. She must be tired." But I wasn't tired. I was finally awake. 3 years of success had given me confidence, but it hadn't healed the wound of my father's dismissal. I had buried that pain beneath achievement, using his lack of faith as fuel, rather than confronting it directly. Now, faced with the stunning hypocrisy of his request, I could no longer remain silent. "I'll review the business plan properly," I said, tucking it into my bag. "And I'll give you my decision next week." "We need an answer sooner than that," Michael pressed. "The developers are threatening to walk if they don't get paid." That single statement told me everything I needed to know about the state of CryptoSecure. No competent development team would continue working without proper contracts and payment structures in place. Either Michael was exaggerating the urgency to pressure me, or his company was even more mismanaged than I had initially assessed. "Next week," I repeated firmly. "I have investors and board members who expect me to exercise due diligence with every financial decision. I won't treat this differently just because it's family." My father's expression was a complex mixture of frustration, disappointment, and something else. Perhaps the first flicker of recognition that the dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the daughter seeking his approval. I was a successful business leader being asked for financial rescue. As I drove home that evening, the weight of the business plan seemed to grow heavier in my bag. I had no intention of investing. In CryptoSecure, the very name reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what customers in that space actually valued. But simply refusing wasn't enough. This moment called for something more significant than rejection or even revenge. This was an opportunity to finally transform the relationship with my father and brother from one based on outdated hierarchies to one built on mutual respect. The question wasn't whether to write a check. It was how to turn this situation into a catalyst for change that was long overdue. By the time I reached my apartment overlooking the city lights, I had the beginnings of a plan. It wouldn't be what my father expected. It wouldn't be what Michael wanted. But it might be exactly what they both needed. And more importantly, it would be what I needed to finally close the chapter on seeking validation from those who had been unwilling to believe in me when it mattered most. My apartment had always been my sanctuary, a space where I could think clearly, away from the echoes of my father's doubt. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, each glittering light representing another business, another dream being pursued. I tossed my keys onto the marble countertop and placed Michael's business plan beside them. 3 years earlier, I had sat at this same counter, tears streaming down my face after my father's rejection of my business concept. That night had been a turning point, not because of the pain, but because of what emerged from it. A steely determination that would become the foundation of Verda Technologies' success. I had met Diane Zhang the following week, a chance encounter, at a sustainable business conference where I volunteered to save on the attendance fee. Diane was different from my father in every conceivable way. Where he saw obstacles, she saw possibilities. Where he demanded conformity to established patterns, she celebrated innovative thinking. Most importantly, where he had refused to even read my business plan, she spent 3 hours dissecting it, challenging assumptions, and strengthening projections. The packaging industry isn't oversaturated, she had told me, contradicting my father's dismissal. It's under-innovated. There's a massive market gap for truly sustainable solutions that don't compromise on performance. Diane became my first investor, but more importantly, my mentor. With her guidance, I refined my business model, secured patents for my biodegradable polymer formulations, and built relationships with manufacturers willing to take a chance on my unproven technology. The $50,000 she invested, half of what Michael was now asking from me, had been repaid within 18 months as Verda secured its first major contracts. I opened my laptop and pulled up the file I'd created after my father's rejection, a detailed documentation of every dismissive comment, every obstacle placed in my path, and every subsequent achievement that proved him wrong. It wasn't a document, born from bitterness, though it had started that way. Over time, it had evolved into something more constructive, a reminder that external validation was never the foundation of success. Next to it, I created a new document for analyzing Michael's business plan. Despite my initial reaction at dinner, I owed him the courtesy of a thorough review. Perhaps there was something of value buried beneath the buzzwords and inflated projections. Perhaps CryptoSecure wasn't just another blockchain solution searching for a problem to solve. 3 hours later, I had my answer. The business was fundamentally flawed, but not beyond salvation. Michael had actually identified a legitimate pain point in cross-border payments for small businesses, a problem I was intimately familiar with as Verda expanded internationally. His solution, however, was overcomplicated, unnecessarily dependent on blockchain technology that added cost without corresponding benefits, and positioned to compete in an already crowded market segment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. More troubling were the financial projections, which showed a burn rate that would consume the requested $100,000 in less than 2 months with no clear path to revenue. The development team was outlandishly expensive, suggesting either inexperience in managing technical resources or possibly self-dealing with friends hired at above-market rates. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, watching the city. Lights flicker below. The situation crystallized in my mind. This wasn't about Michael's business at all. It was about patterns established years ago that had never been challenged. My father's unwavering support for my brother's endeavors contrasted with his dismissal of mine. Michael's expectation of safety nets and second chances that had never been extended to me, and my own complicity in maintaining this dynamic through silence. Tomorrow morning, I would have my regular weekly call with Diane. She had become more than a mentor over the years. She was the closest thing to a professional, mother figure I had ever known. Her perspective would be invaluable. I slept surprisingly well that night, the clarity of purpose acting as a sedative to the anger that had initially surged during dinner. When my alarm chimed at 5:30 a.m., a habit formed during Verda's early days when I was CEO, sales department, and sometimes delivery person all in one, I was already mentally preparing for the conversation ahead. Diane answered on the second ring, her voice crisp despite the early hour. At 68, she maintained the schedule of someone half her age, a discipline that had served her well through building and selling 3 successful companies. "You sound different today," she observed after our initial greetings, demonstrating the same perceptiveness that had made her such an effective mentor. "What's happened?" I explained the situation, my father's request, Michael's failing startup, the painful irony of being asked to invest in a business venture after having my own dismissed without consideration. "And you're tempted to refuse," Diane stated rather than asked. "Wouldn't you be?" I countered. "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "But I've learned that the most powerful responses aren't necessarily the most emotionally satisfying ones in the moment." That was classic Diane, looking beyond the immediate gratification to the longer strategic view. She had taught me this approach to business decisions, but I had sometimes struggled to apply the same principle to personal matters. "What would you suggest?" I asked, though I already had an inkling of her direction. "Consider what outcome would truly represent success here," she said. "Is it showing your father and brother that you can be as dismissive as they were? Or is it demonstrating a different model of family support, one that includes accountability, mentorship, and genuine concern for long-term success?" Her questions settled into the quiet morning air of my apartment, finding resonance with thoughts that had been forming since the previous night. Diane continued before I could respond. "You've built Verda on principles that stand in direct contrast to your father's approach to business. You value sustainability over quick profits, collaborative innovation over hierarchical control, transparency over authority. Why would you abandon those principles when dealing with your family?" She was right, of course. The foundation of my business success had been built precisely upon rejecting my father's outdated methodologies. Verda's corporate culture celebrated honest feedback, embraced failure as learning, and prioritized purpose alongside profit. These weren't just business strategies. They were values I had developed in direct response to the environment I had grown up in. "So you think I should invest in Michael's company?" I asked, though I knew that wasn't what she was suggesting. "I think you should offer Michael what you wished had been offered to you," Diane clarified. "Not unquestioning financial support, but something far more valuable. Honest assessment, constructive guidance, and a path forward based on reality rather than ego or wishful thinking." As our conversation concluded, a framework began to take shape in my mind. Not a rejection of my brother's request, but a restructuring of it into something that might actually benefit him in the long run. Something that might even begin to heal the family dynamics that had gone unaddressed for too long. I spent the rest of the morning drafting a formal analysis of CryptoSecure's business plan, applying the same rigorous evaluation methods I used when considering potential investments for Verda's innovation fund. The document was direct, but not unkind, identifying critical flaws while suggesting potential pivots that could leverage Michael's core insights about small business payment challenges. I then drafted a second document, more personal in nature. This one outlined terms under which I would be willing to support Michael's venture, not through a blank check, but through a structured arrangement that included milestones, mentorship, and mutual accountability. The terms were fair but firm, offering a path to success that would require him to earn support rather than simply expect it. By noon, I had scheduled a meeting with Michael alone, deliberately excluding my father from this first conversation. If any change was going to occur, it needed to start with a direct dialogue between siblings, untainted by the distorting presence of our father's expectations. When I finally closed my laptop, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive since the Sunday dinner confrontation. I wasn't responding from wounded pride or seeking revenge. I was offering an alternative model of family support, one built on the same foundation that had made Verda successful: honest assessment, clear accountability, and genuine concern for sustainable outcomes rather than quick fixes. The foundation of my response wasn't rejection or even conditional acceptance. It was something more transformative: the application of hard-earned wisdom to break a cycle that had limited both Michael and me in different ways. Whether he would recognize it as the gift it was remained to be seen, but I knew with certainty that this approach aligned with my values in a way that either silent compliance or outright rejection never could. As I prepared for the rest of my workday, I realized that this situation had revealed something important. The true foundation of success isn't validation from authority figures or freedom from obstacles, but the development of principles that guide decisions consistently regardless of context. I had built Verda on values that stood in opposition to my father's approach to business. Now it was time to ensure that those same values governed my approach to family as well. The coffee shop where I arranged to meet Michael was neutral territory. Neither my corporate office with its awards and achievements that might intimidate him, nor any of his preferred upscale lounges where he regularly networked with potential investors. Groundwork Coffee was unpretentious, busy enough to provide privacy through ambient noise, yet intimate enough for meaningful conversation. I arrived 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained from years of proving myself in an industry that had initially viewed me with skepticism. Taking a corner table, I arranged Michael's business plan alongside my analysis and proposal, then ordered a simple black coffee, another contrast to my brother, who would undoubtedly arrive precisely on time and order something with an Italian name and precise milk temperature. As predicted, Michael walked in at exactly 2 p.m., dressed in the uniform of aspiring tech founders, expensive jeans, casual button-down, and a blazer that cost more than my first month's office rent. His confident smile faltered slightly when he spotted me already settled with documents spread before me, rather than the checkbook he had likely anticipated. "Thanks for meeting me halfway," he said, gesturing to the coffee shop location between our respective offices before ordering a complicated espresso drink that the barista had to clarify twice. "I thought we needed space to talk properly," I replied, without distractions. The implication was clear, without our father's presence steering the conversation. Michael nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his features that surprised me. Perhaps he wasn't entirely comfortable with Dad's approach either. Once his elaborate coffee arrived, I decided to forgo small talk. "I've reviewed your business plan thoroughly, Michael. I have some thoughts." He straightened, switching instantly to pitch mode. "I know it's ambitious, but the market potential is enormous. Cross-border payments represent $1 trillion. I held up my hand gently. "I'm familiar with the market. Verda operates in 23 countries now. International payments are a significant part of our operational challenges." This simple statement, a reminder of my company's global reach, seemed to momentarily disorient him. Like our father, Michael had a talent for overlooking the scope of what I had built, categorizing Verda as a niche green business rather than the industry-transforming company it had become. "Right," he recovered quickly. "So you understand? The opportunity." "I understand the problem space," I clarified. "Your identification of pain points for small businesses handling international transactions is actually insightful. But your solution, I slid my analysis across the table. Your solution needs recalibration. Michael stared at the document, 10 pages of detailed assessment that had taken me hours to compile. The kind of professional courtesy that had never been extended to my business plan 3 years earlier. You actually read it, he said quietly, surprise evident in his voice. Of course I read it. You're asking for $100,000. Did you expect me to just write a check without due diligence? He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Dad seemed to think. Dad has his own approach to business decisions, I said neutrally. I have mine. Michael began scanning the analysis, his expression shifting from defensive to thoughtful, as he absorbed the substantial feedback. I had structured the document carefully, beginning with the strengths I'd identified in his market research, then addressing the critical weaknesses in technology approach, team composition, and financial projections. The final section outlined potential pivots that could salvage the core business concept. This is, he began, then stopped, continuing to read. Professional feedback, I supplied. The kind I would give to any founder seeking investment from me. He looked up, surprise registering again. You consider investments? This was the first revelation that Michael, like our father, had no real understanding of what I actually did beyond running Virta. They had never asked about my broader business activities, my investment portfolio, or my mentorship of other founders. They had created a narrative about my lucky success and never bothered to update it as evidence to the contrary accumulated. I've invested in 17 startups over the past 2 years, I explained. 9 are showing strong growth trajectories. 2 have already provided successful exits. 6 are still in development stages, but meeting milestones. I paused deliberately. None received funding without rigorous vetting and structured support systems. Michael sat back, coffee temporarily. Forgotten. I could almost see him recalibrating his perception of me in real time, from lucky sister who might provide an easy check to experienced investor, whose analysis suddenly carried unexpected weight. According to your assessment, CryptoSecure is essentially dead in the water, he finally said, having finished reading the document. In its current form, yes, I confirmed. The blockchain approach is unnecessarily complex and expensive for the problem you're solving. Your development costs are unsustainable. Your go-to-market strategy competes directly with established players who have 9-figure war chests, and your runway is critically short. The old Michael would have become defensive, perhaps even stormed out. But something in the thoroughness of my analysis seemed to penetrate the armor of entitlement he had worn for so long. Instead of arguing, he asked a question that surprised me. What would you do differently? This was the opening I had hoped for, but hadn't been certain would come. I slid the second document across the table, my proposed alternative approach. I wouldn't try to rebuild the entire payment infrastructure with blockchain when the core problem for small businesses is actually interface complexity and predictability of fees, I explained as he began reading. I would create a software layer that simplifies interaction with existing payment rails, provides fee transparency, and automates currency conversion at optimal times. Michael continued reading, occasionally nodding. This approach would require a complete pivot. It would require focusing on solving the actual customer problem rather than chasing technology trends, I corrected gently. Blockchain might eventually play a role, but not as the foundational architecture. Not when existing systems can be leveraged more efficiently. And these development cost estimates, he noted, pointing to my projections, they're about 40% of what we've been spending. Because you're overpaying your development team significantly compared to market rates, I confirmed. And your technical architecture is unnecessarily complex. A flash of defensiveness crossed his face. Jason and Trent are top-tier developers. They worked at Google and Stripe. Working at prestigious companies doesn't justify billing rates. Double the market standard for early-stage startups, I countered. Especially when they've designed an over-engineered solution that doesn't address the core customer need efficiently. Michael fell silent, continuing to study the documents before him. The coffee shop buzzed around us, patrons coming and going, completely unaware of the significant recalibration happening at our small corner table. "This is actually good," he finally admitted, tapping my alternative approach. "Better than what we've been building, if I'm being honest. Simpler, more focused on the real pain points." The admission seemed physically difficult for him, as if acknowledging the merit in my analysis contradicted some fundamental narrative he had constructed about our respective capabilities. "But it would mean starting over," he continued. "The investors who already pulled out. They wouldn't reconsider based on a pivot this significant." "Probably not," I agreed. Which brings us to this. I turned to the final page of my proposal document, which outlined potential terms for my involvement. Michael read it slowly, his eyebrows rising. "This isn't just an investment offer." "No, it's not," I confirmed. "It's a structured support program. I'm offering $50,000 in initial funding, contingent on a complete restructuring of your approach along the lines I've suggested. I'm offering monthly mentoring sessions, introductions to my network of payment industry contacts, and access to Verda's financial operations team for insights on international payment challenges from the customer perspective. In exchange for 30% equity," he noted, reaching the terms section. "In exchange for bringing actual value beyond cash," I clarified, "and for requiring accountability through milestone-based funding rather than a lump sum that would be burned through in weeks." Michael sat back, clearly processing the comprehensive nature of what I was proposing. It wasn't the easy check our father had anticipated. It wasn't the hands-off transaction Michael had expected. It was something much more demanding and potentially more valuable than either had considered. "Dad won't like this approach," he said finally. "He wants a simple cash injection to keep the current operation afloat." "I'm not offering the money to Dad," I replied evenly. "I'm offering a partnership to you. The question is whether you want a temporary bailout that postpones inevitable failure or a fundamental restructuring that addresses the actual problems in your business model." Michael looked down at the documents again, then back up at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him before, something approaching genuine respect. "Why would you do this?" he asked, after how dismissive Dad was. "About your business? After how little attention any of us paid to what you were building? Why not just tell me to take a hike?" This was the second revelation of our meeting, that Michael was at least peripherally aware of the double standard that had characterized our father's treatment of our respective business ventures. That he recognized on some level the hypocrisy of the current situation. "Because proving Dad wrong was never the point of building Verda," I answered honestly. "And refusing to help you wouldn't serve any purpose beyond momentary satisfaction. I built a company based on principles I believe in: sustainability, innovation, mutual benefit. Those principles don't stop at the edge of my business life." Michael nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning in his expression. "You're offering me what Dad never offered you." "I'm offering you what helped me succeed, despite Dad's lack of support," I corrected. "Honest feedback, practical guidance, and accountability measures that drive real progress rather than protect ego or maintain appearances." As we continued our conversation, exploring the details of my proposed pivot strategy, I observed a gradual transformation in my brother's demeanor, from entitled expectation to genuine engagement with the substantive issues facing his business. For perhaps the first time, we were having a conversation as peers rather than as competitors for our father's approval or as characters in the family mythology he had constructed. The revelation wasn't just Michael's recognition of my business acumen or my unexpected generosity. It was my own discovery that transcending old family patterns required neither complete capitulation nor vengeful rejection, but the creation of a third path based on the values I had fought to establish in my professional life. My father's office had always intimidated me as a child. The heavy mahogany desk, the wall of business books he referenced but I suspected he rarely read. The framed awards and newspaper clippings chronicling Bradshaw Consulting's modest successes. All created an atmosphere designed to convey authority and expertise. Now, standing in that same space at 36 years old, I saw it differently. A carefully constructed stage set for performing the role of the successful businessman rather than doing the messy, adaptive work of actual innovation. I had deliberately chosen to meet him here rather than on neutral ground. This confrontation needed to happen on his territory, within the symbolic center of his authority. Michael stood beside me, unusually quiet. Our coffee shop meeting 2 days earlier had stretched into dinner, then continued with lengthy email exchanges and a working session at my office. The pivot plan for his company, now rechristened ClearPay, rather than the buzzword-heavy CryptoSecure, was taking coherent shape. My father looked up from his computer, his expression shifting from mild annoyance at the interruption to something more calculating when he registered that we had arrived. Together. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I assume this means you've worked things out about the investment." "We have," I confirmed, placing a folder on his desk. "But probably not in the way you anticipated." His eyes narrowed slightly. At my tone, confident, undeflective, making no apology for taking control of the situation he had initiated. He opened the folder and began scanning the document inside, a comprehensive overview of the pivot strategy Michael and I had developed, along with the structured investment terms I had proposed. "This isn't what we discussed," he said finally, looking up at Michael rather than me. "This restructures the entire company." "It saves the company," Michael corrected, surprising me with his directness. Eliza helped me see that our original approach wasn't viable. The blockchain architecture was unnecessarily complex, our development costs were unsustainable, and our go-to-market strategy put us in direct competition with established players who would crush us. My father's expression darkened. "You've been working on CryptoSecure for over a year? You're telling me you're ready to abandon all that work based on a few days of conversations with your sister?" "I'm telling you I'm ready to build something that actually solves the problem we identified, rather than continuing to burn cash on a solution that impresses other tech founders but doesn't deliver real value to customers," Michael replied. The clarity and confidence in my brother's voice was remarkable, so different from the defensive posturing that had characterized his pitch at the family dinner. In just 2 days of honest feedback and collaborative problem-solving, he had begun to shed the protective layers of buzzwords and trend-chasing that our father's approach to business had encouraged. "And this proposed investment," my father continued, tapping the term sheet with evident displeasure. "50,000 instead of 100,000, milestone-based funding release, 30% equity stake, mandatory weekly strategy sessions. This isn't a family helping a family member. This is a venture capital arrangement." "It's better than venture capital," I countered. "No VC would offer this level of hands-on mentorship and operational support along with funding. And no VC would accept the current state of the business without demanding even more significant equity and control provisions." My father's gaze finally shifted to me, his expression hardening. "You're taking advantage of your brother's vulnerable position to seize control of his company." The accusation was so perfectly backward, so emblematic of my father's distorted perception, that I almost laughed. Instead, I took a deliberate breath. "Michael, could you give us a few minutes?" I asked, my eyes still locked with my father's. My brother hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be in the reception area when you're ready." Once the door closed behind him, I took the seat across from my father's desk, not perching nervously on the edge as I had done so many times before, but settling in with the posture of someone prepared for a substantive conversation. 3. Years ago, I brought you a business plan for Verta Technology, I began, my voice steady. You dismissed it without reading beyond the executive summary. You told me the market didn't need another packaging company. You said I lacked the experience to succeed in manufacturing. You refused to even consider providing the $25,000 seed funding I requested, 1/4 of what you expected me to give Michael without question. My father shifted uncomfortably, but maintained his defensive expression. That was different. The circumstances were that you didn't believe in me, I interrupted. Something I rarely did with my father. You didn't believe in my idea, my capabilities, or my potential to overcome obstacles. But when Michael needed support, you assumed I would provide it unconditionally, despite having vastly more industry and investment experience than you have. His face flushed slightly. This isn't about past grievances, Eliza. This is about helping your brother in a time of need. That's exactly what I'm doing, I countered. I'm helping him build a sustainable business based on sound principles, rather than enabling a flawed approach that would inevitably fail regardless of how much money we poured into it. I leaned forward, maintaining eye contact. What you wanted wasn't help for Michael. It was a blank check that would postpone the necessary confrontation with reality. You wanted me to protect him from the consequences of an unsound business model perpetuating the pattern that has limited his growth as an entrepreneur and as a person. My father's expression shifted from defensive to angry. You've built one successful company and suddenly you're the expert on entrepreneurship? Michael's approach was innovative, cutting edge. It was following trends rather than solving problems, I cut in again. And yes, I am an expert. Not just from building Verda, but from investing in and mentoring 17 other startups over the past 2 years. From serving on the advisory boards of 3 successful technology companies. From evaluating over 100 investment opportunities and developing a framework for distinguishing between viable innovations and attractive packaging around fundamentally flawed concepts. This silenced him momentarily. Another revelation of how little attention he had paid to my professional development beyond the superficial acknowledgement that Verda hadn't failed as he'd predicted. What exactly are you trying to accomplish here? He finally asked. I'm trying to break a pattern, I replied honestly. A pattern where you undervalue my contributions while overprotecting Michael from necessary challenges. A pattern where your approval is contingent on following your outdated business playbook rather than adapting to current market realities. A pattern that has limited both Michael's growth and our relationship as father and daughter. My father leaned back, studying me with new awareness. The confrontation was pushing us into unfamiliar territory, beyond the comfortable scripts of dismissive father and deferential daughter that had defined our interactions for decades. Verda has been more successful than I anticipated, he conceded. After a long moment, though the admission seemed physically difficult for him. But that doesn't qualify you to completely restructure your brother's business vision. My qualification comes from building a company that now generates $27 million in annual revenue, I replied calmly. From creating a product line that's displaced petroleum-based packaging in 4 major industries. From raising $12 million in Series B funding at a $140 million valuation. From being recognized by the industry I supposedly couldn't succeed in because I lacked the right experience or connections. I wasn't listing these accomplishments to boast, but to establish a reality that my father had been systematically avoiding, that I had not succeeded despite his dismissal, but had built something objectively significant by any relevant measure. What exactly do you want from me, Eliza? He asked, his tone shifting from confrontational to something more resigned. I want you to recognize that your judgment about business viability has been demonstrably flawed, I answered directly. I want you to acknowledge that the mentorship and structured support I'm offering Michael is more valuable than the unconditional cash infusion you proposed. And I want you to understand that this isn't about settling old scores. It's about creating healthier patterns for our family relationships going forward. My father was silent for several moments, his gaze drifting to the window behind his desk. The afternoon sun highlighted the silver that had overtaken his once dark hair, the deepened lines around his eyes. For the first time, I saw him not as the intimidating authority figure of my childhood, but as a man confronting the limitations of his perspective, the flaws in his long-held assumptions. "I thought I was protecting him," he said finally, still, looking toward the window rather than at me. "Business is brutal. Failure is public. Humiliating." "Failure is also instructive," I countered, my tone softening slightly. The lessons I learned from early rejections were crucial to Verda's eventual success. By shielding Michael from honest feedback and necessary pivots, you've been delaying his growth, not supporting it. My father turned back to me, his expression more open than I had seen it in years. "And your proposal, this structured investment and mentorship? You believe this will give him a genuine chance at success?" "I do," I confirmed. "The core insight about small business payment challenges is valid. The initial execution approach was fundamentally flawed. With the right pivot, ClearPay could become a viable business. Not overnight, not without significant work, but with a realistic path forward rather than the inevitable crash that CryptoSecure was facing." He nodded slowly, then reached for the document again, this time reading it more carefully rather than scanning for points of objection. I remained silent, allowing him time to process both the business strategy and the implicit shift in family dynamics it represented. "You've become quite the businesswoman," he said finally, looking up from the document with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between pride, surprise, and perhaps a touch of regret. "I've become the businesswoman I always had the potential to be," I corrected gently, "the one who was there 3 years ago when you refused to see her." He acknowledged this with a small nod, neither defending his past judgment nor dismissing the accuracy of my assessment. It was a small concession, but from my father, it represented significant movement. "And Michael? He's on board with this approach?" he asked. Enthusiastically, I confirmed. Once he got past his initial defensiveness, he engaged with the pivot strategy with remarkable insight and adaptability. He's got genuine talent when he's not chasing trends or trying to impress the wrong audience. Something in this observation seemed to land with particular impact. My father's expression shifted again, a flash of self-recognition crossing his features as he perhaps saw his own influence in Michael's previous approach. "I'd like to be involved," he said after another thoughtful pause. "Not to undermine your arrangement, but to learn, to understand this new approach you're proposing." It was the last thing I had expected from this confrontation. Not defensive rejection or reluctant acceptance, but an expression of genuine interest in the methodology I had developed. A willingness to consider that his daughter might have something to teach him after decades of assuming the instruction could only flow in the other direction. "We're having our first formal strategy session tomorrow at my office," I replied, careful to keep surprise from my voice. "You're welcome to join as an observer, with the understanding that I'll be leading the process." He nodded, an acknowledgement of the new hierarchy that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. I'd appreciate that opportunity. As I stood to leave, I felt a strange lightness, not the vindictive satisfaction of proving him wrong that I might have once anticipated, but something more constructive and forward-looking. The confrontation had cleared space for a new kind of relationship, one based on demonstrated capability rather than assumed authority. The pattern hadn't just been broken, it was being actively reconstructed into something healthier for all of us. The conference room at Verda Technology headquarters bore little resemblance to my father's traditional office. Floor to ceiling, windows overlooked urban green spaces we had helped develop as part of our community sustainability initiatives. The walls displayed not awards or press clippings, but data visualizations tracking our carbon offset metrics and customer impact. Stories. The long wooden table was crafted from reclaimed timber, harvested from sustainably managed forests, a physical embodiment of our company's core values. Around this table sat an unexpected assembly, Michael reviewing his notes with newfound intensity. My father, uncharacteristically quiet, observing rather than directing. Diane Zhang, who had rearranged her schedule to attend after I explained the situation, and 2 members of my product development team who had experience with payment systems through our international operations. As I stood to begin the meeting, I caught Diane's subtle nod of encouragement. She understood better than anyone the significance of this moment, not just for ClearPay's business prospects, but for the recalibration of family dynamics that had been dysfunctional for decades. Thank you all for being here, I began, activating the large display screen behind me. Today's session has 2 primary objectives: finalizing ClearPay's pivot strategy and establishing metrics for the first 90-day development cycle. What followed was unlike any family interaction we had ever experienced. For 3 hours, we engaged in rigorous analysis of small business payment challenges, competitive landscape mapping, and technical architecture planning. Michael presented his revised value proposition with clarity and purpose, fielding challenging questions from my team with thoughtful responses rather than defensive posturing. My father remained largely silent, his expression shifting between concentration and what appeared to be genuine revelation, as he witnessed a business development methodology entirely different from his own. Diane occasionally offered insights. From her extensive experience with fintech integrations, each contribution demonstrating the value of targeted expertise over generalized business platitudes. The key differentiator, Michael explained, pointing to his revised user experience wireframes, isn't blockchain technology or even lower fees. It's predictability and simplicity. Small businesses can't afford financial surprises when operating across borders. Our transparent fee structure and automated currency timing optimizations address the actual pain point, not the theoretical advantages of decentralized ledgers. I watched with quiet pride as my brother articulated concepts we had refined together over the past week. His market insights now unburdened by unnecessary technological complexity. His entrepreneurial energy channeled toward solving genuine customer problems rather than impressing technologists or following investment trends. During a brief break, my father approached me by the refreshment table, his expression thoughtful. "This is not what I expected," he admitted, keeping his voice low. "The structured approach to problem validation?" I asked. "All of it," he clarified. "The collaborative dynamic, the emphasis on customer pain points before technology selection, the way you're leading without dominating." He paused, selecting his words carefully. "It's very different from how I would have approached it." "Different can be valuable," I replied, neither criticizing his methods nor minimizing the distinction. Verda's success has been built on questioning traditional approaches, not just to material science, but to company structure and decision-making processes. He nodded slowly. "I can see that now." The simple acknowledgement, "I can see that now," contained worlds of significance. My father, who had built his consulting practice on projecting unwavering certainty, was admitting to a new perspective. He was acknowledging, however indirectly, that his daughter's methodology had merit beyond what he had previously recognized, or been willing to concede. As we reconvened for the final portion of the meeting, I guided the group through establishing concrete metrics for the first development phase: user research completion targets, prototype functionality requirements, and initial customer acquisition goals. Each objective was tied to specific release points for the funding I had committed. "This milestone approach keeps everyone accountable," I explained, addressing my father as much as Michael. "It ensures that investment follows validation rather than preceding it. We're not funding activity, we're funding progress toward defined outcomes." Michael nodded, already internalizing this principle. "And it forces us to confront reality sooner rather than later. If our assumptions are wrong, We'll know within weeks rather than after burning through the entire investment. Exactly, I confirmed. Failure isn't the enemy. Extended failure without learning and adaptation is the real threat to any venture. As the meeting concluded, Diane pulled me aside while the others gathered their materials. "You've done something remarkable here," she said quietly. "Not just for your brother's business prospects, but for your family system." "I've applied what I learned from you," I acknowledged. "Structured support rather than blank checks or outright rejection. Clear expectations coupled with genuine assistance." She smiled. "You've gone beyond what I taught you. This," she gestured toward the room where my father and brother were engaged in conversation that appeared more collaborative than hierarchical. "This is a transformation of relationship patterns, not just business strategy." She was right. Something fundamental had shifted over the past week. The change wasn't just in ClearPay's business model or in my recognition as a business leader. It was in how we related to one another, the implicit hierarchies, the patterns of deference and authority, the assumptions about whose expertise warranted respect. The following weeks accelerated this transformation. 3 times a week, Michael and I met to review progress on the pivot strategy. My father joined approximately half of these sessions, gradually shifting from observer to occasional contributor, offering insights from his decades of business experience, but within the framework I had established rather than attempting to override it. The first $15,000 investment installment was released when Michael completed comprehensive user research with 30 small businesses engaged in international commerce. The findings validated our core hypothesis about pain points while revealing nuances that further refined the product roadmap. The transformation was perhaps most evident during our third family Sunday dinner after the initial confrontation. As we gathered around my parents' dining table, the conversation naturally turned to business developments. "We've secured commitments from 12 beta testers," Michael announced, his enthusiasm grounded in concrete progress rather than speculative potential. "All small businesses with regular international payment needs, representing 4 different industry sectors." "That's excellent validation at this stage," I responded. "How are you addressing the integration concerns that came up in last week's technical review?" What followed was a substantive discussion of API compatibility and user authentication. Flows. Subject matter that would have been dismissed as boring technical detail in previous family gatherings. My mother watched with quiet amazement as her husband, son, and daughter engaged in collaborative problem-solving rather than the competitive positioning or surface-level updates that had characterized past business conversations. Later, as I helped her clear the dinner dishes, she paused by the kitchen sink. "I've never seen the 3 of you like this," she observed. "James is actually listening to both of you. Michael is speaking about concrete realities instead of grandiose plans. And you," she touched my arm gently, "you're leading without apology." Her perception was accurate. The transformation hadn't required me to become more aggressive or domineering. Instead, it had emerged from a grounded confidence in the value of my expertise and methodologies, coupled with a willingness to create structure that benefited everyone rather than seeking revenge for past dismissals. The most profound shift became evident 6 weeks into the ClearPay pivot during a critical technical review meeting. The initial prototype had revealed integration challenges more complex than anticipated. The projected timeline for beta release was at risk. In the past, such a setback would have triggered predictable responses. My father would have pushed for pressing forward regardless, prioritizing the appearance of progress over addressing fundamental issues. Michael would have sought ways to reframe the delay as strategic rather than problematic. I would have hesitated to challenge their approach directly. Instead, I watched as Michael himself identified the critical issues, acknowledged the timeline implications, and proposed a modified development sequence that addressed the core problems while maintaining momentum on user experience refinement. "We need to be realistic about these integration challenges," he stated plainly. Pushing forward with the original timeline would create technical debt we'd pay for later. I recommend we reallocate resources to solve the authentication architecture properly now, even if it means delaying the full feature set for initial beta. My father, rather than pushing for the appearance of faster progress, asked thoughtful questions about the implications and alternatives. When he finally spoke, his perspective reflected a significant evolution. "I'm inclined to support Michael's assessment," he said, looking to me rather than assuming his opinion would automatically prevail. "The milestone structure you've established, Eliza, emphasizes validation over vanity metrics. Better to have solid fundamentals with fewer features than an impressive feature list built on shaky technical foundations." In that moment, I realized the transformation wasn't just about my father and brother finally recognizing my business acumen, or about Michael developing more substantive entrepreneurial approaches. It was about all of us embracing a more effective model of both business development and family interaction, one based on facing reality directly, valuing substantive progress over appearances, and engaging in genuine collaboration rather than competition for authority. The transformation extended beyond our family system. 2 months into the ClearPay pivot, Diane suggested bringing the structured milestone investment approach to Virta's broader portfolio of startup investments. The methodology I had developed in response to my brother's situation became formalized as the Bradshaw Framework for early-stage company development, a model that emphasized validation before scaling, technical fundamentals before feature, proliferation, and continuous customer feedback loops throughout the product development cycle. As ClearPay prepared to launch its beta with 15 small business customers, a smaller number than originally projected but with a more robust technical foundation, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with my father's tone-deaf request for funding. What could have been a moment of bitter refusal or reluctant compliance had instead catalyzed a transformation that benefited everyone involved. Michael was building a business with genuine market potential rather than chasing investment trends. My father was expanding his perspective on effective business development methodologies. And I had found a way to translate my success into influence that transformed family dynamics rather than simply proving someone wrong. The greatest revelation was that transcending old patterns didn't require abandoning family connections or fighting for dominance within them. It meant creating new structures, where everyone could grow beyond the limiting roles we had unconsciously accepted for decades. The transformation wasn't about winning or losing. It was about establishing a new game entirely, one with different metrics for success and more possibilities for everyone involved. 4 months after our initial confrontation, I stood at the podium in the Westfield Convention Center's main hall, surveying an audience of over 300 entrepreneurs, investors, and business students. The Regional Small Business Innovation Conference had invited me to deliver the keynote address, not about Virta's sustainable packaging breakthroughs, but about the structured development methodology that had emerged from the ClearPay pivot. Sustainable business growth isn't just about environmental impact, though that remains crucial, I explained, advancing to the next slide in my presentation. It's about creating development frameworks that validate assumptions before committing extensive resources. It's about measuring meaningful progress rather than vanity metrics. And perhaps most importantly, it's about building organizations capable of confronting reality rather than preserving comfortable illusions. In the front row, Michael sat beside my father, both taking notes, another sight that would have been unimaginable months earlier. ClearPay had successfully launched its beta program, now serving 22 small businesses with international payment needs. The customer feedback had been unequivocally positive, focusing on exactly the value proposition we had refined together: simplicity, predictability, and transparent fee structures that eliminated the anxiety around cross-border transactions. The Bradshaw Framework emerged from a specific challenge, I continued, acknowledging my brother with a slight nod. How to transform a struggling venture with sound market insights but flawed execution into a viable business with sustainable growth potential. The methodology we developed through that process has now been applied to 11 different companies in our investment portfolio, with consistent results: shorter time to market, more efficient resource utilization, and higher customer satisfaction from initial product releases. What I didn't explicitly mention was how the framework had transformed our family dynamics along with business outcomes. That part of the story remained private, though its effects were visible to anyone who knew, as before and after. My father, sitting attentively rather than checking his phone or mentally preparing his critique of my presentation. My brother, confidently fielding technical questions during the networking session rather than relying on buzzwords and trend following. Myself, speaking with authority about methodologies I had developed rather than seeking external validation of their value. After the presentation, as attendees gathered in small groups for the networking reception, I found myself approached by Regina Okafor, founder of Threshold Ventures and one of the most respected early-stage investors in the region. "That was refreshingly substantive," she said, extending her hand. "Most keynotes at these events are either vague inspirational stories or thinly disguised product pitches. Yours actually provided actionable methodology." "Thank you," I replied. "The framework developed organically from necessity. We needed a structure that created accountability while providing support." Regina nodded thoughtfully. "I'd be interested in discussing how this approach might apply to our portfolio companies. We've been searching for a middle ground between the hands-off check-writing model and the heavy-handed control some VC firms exercise." As we exchanged contact information, I noticed my father across the room, engaged in animated conversation with the dean of the business school that had co-sponsored the event. Rather than dominating the discussion as he typically would have, he appeared to be listening intently, asking questions, building on the other person's points. Later, as the three of us shared dinner at a restaurant overlooking the harbor, my father raised his glass in an unexpected toast. "To the Bradshaw framework," he said, "and to the daughter who created it by refusing to accept limitations, including those I placed on her." Michael joined the toast enthusiastically, but I hesitated, studying my father's face for signs of the performative praise he sometimes offered in public while maintaining private reservations. Instead, I found something I had rarely seen directed toward me: genuine admiration untainted by qualification or comparison. "The framework is still evolving," I said, accepting the acknowledgement while maintaining perspective. "We're learning from each implementation, refining the milestone structures based on industry-specific variables." "That's what makes it valuable," my father replied. "It's not a rigid formula but an adaptive methodology. That's something I never fully grasped in my own business approach." The admission that there were fundamental aspects of business development he hadn't fully understood despite decades of consulting experience represented a transformation far more significant than his acceptance of my specific accomplishments. It signaled a willingness to question his own assumptions, to consider that his expertise had limitations, to embrace learning rather than defending established positions. "I've been thinking about how the framework might apply to Bradshaw Consulting," he continued, referring to his own firm. "We've been stagnant for the past few years, relying on the same service model while the market has evolved around us." Michael and I exchanged surprised glances. Our father rarely acknowledged anything less than unqualified success in his own business operations. "I'd be happy to walk through how the methodology might apply," I offered carefully, uncertain how he would receive such assistance from his daughter. "I'd appreciate that," he replied without hesitation. "Perhaps next week? I've already shared your conference presentation with my management team. They have questions I'm not equipped to answer." This request, for my professional guidance applied to his own business, marked perhaps the most profound indicator of how thoroughly our family system had transformed. The father who had once dismissed my business plan without reading it was now actively seeking my methodology to revitalize his own company. The expansion continued in unexpected ways over the following months. ClearPay secured its first round of external funding, $750,000 at a $4.5 million valuation from a fintech-focused investment group, impressed by both the product's market fit and the structured development approach. Michael had matured as a founder, learning to balance vision with pragmatic execution, technological possibilities with customer priorities. My father's consulting firm underwent its own transformation, shifting from generalized business advice to specialized guidance on sustainable growth methodologies, with the Bradshaw framework as its centerpiece. Rather than competing with my approach or attempting to claim credit for it, he positioned himself as an implementation specialist, acknowledging the origin of the methodology while adding value through his decades of industry experience. Perhaps most significantly, our family dynamics expanded beyond the constraints that had limited genuine connection for so long. Sunday dinners evolved from performative reporting of accomplishments and carefully edited setbacks to substantive discussions where vulnerability became a strength rather than a weakness. My mother, initially a quiet witness to this transformation, began contributing her own insights about organizational psychology drawn from her years in educational administration. 6 months after the confrontation in my father's office, Verda launched a formal incubator program for sustainable business innovations, with the Bradshaw framework as its operational methodology. The first cohort included 8 promising startups, each addressing environmental challenges through commercially viable models. Michael helped design the technical integration aspects of the program, while my father contributed mentorship on client relationship management. During the incubator's launch event, I found myself standing beside Diane Zhang, watching my father and brother leading a workshop session on milestone-based development for the participant companies. When you came to me about Michael's failing startup and your father's inappropriate request, I never anticipated this outcome, she admitted. I thought you might find a diplomatic way to refuse without burning bridges. This transformation goes far beyond what seemed possible then. The catalyst was your question about what true success would look like in that situation, I reminded her. You helped me see beyond the immediate satisfaction of rejection to the possibility of systemic change. She nodded. Even so, this level of transformation is remarkable. Your father has fundamentally recalibrated his understanding of his own expertise and limitations. Your brother has developed authentic entrepreneurial capabilities rather than performative ones, and you've transformed a painful family pattern into a methodology that benefits dozens of companies beyond your own. She was right. The expansion had progressed far beyond what I could have imagined during that tense Sunday dinner when my father had slid Michael's business plan across the table with the expectation of unquestioning financial support. What had begun as a confrontation of long-established family patterns had evolved into a genuine collaboration built on mutual respect and complementary capabilities. The framework itself continued to expand in scope and application. Regina Okafor's venture firm adopted modified versions for their portfolio companies. 3 business schools incorporated case studies based on ClearPay's pivot and subsequent success. A business journal published my detailed analysis of the methodology, leading to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities distinct from Verda's core operations. Yet the most meaningful expansion occurred in an unexpected realm: my own identity beyond professional achievement. With family relationships no longer characterized by the need to prove my value through business success, I found myself exploring interests and connections that had been sidelined by that singular focus. I began mentoring young women entrepreneurs through a nonprofit incubator in underserved communities. I reconnected with friends whose invitations I had declined too often while building Verda. I even started dating again after years of telling myself I didn't have time for meaningful relationships. One evening, helping my mother prepare dinner, before the family gathered, I mentioned this broader expansion of my life beyond work. I've noticed, she said, smiling as she chopped vegetables with practiced efficiency. "You laugh more. You talk about books and travel and people, not just business metrics and company milestones. I guess I don't need to prove myself constantly. Anymore," I acknowledged. She paused, knife hovering above the cutting board. "You never needed to prove yourself, Eliza. You needed others to recognize what was already there. There's a difference." Her distinction crystallized something important about the entire transformation. The confrontation and subsequent developments hadn't changed my capabilities or value. They had created conditions where those qualities could be recognized and utilized fully, by my family and by me. As my father and brother arrived, engaging immediately in animated discussion about refinements to the incubator program, I observed with quiet satisfaction how thoroughly the expansion had reshaped all of our lives. My father had discovered new relevance by embracing methodologies that contradicted his previous certainties. Michael had developed authentic expertise rather than performative confidence. I had transcended the limiting role of the daughter with something to prove. The expansion continued to unfold in ways none of us could have fully anticipated. The Bradshaw framework evolved through implementation across diverse business contexts. ClearPay graduated from beta to full market release, accumulating customers at a sustainable rate grounded in service capacity rather than vanity growth metrics. Verda extended its sustainable packaging solutions into new industry sectors, guided by the same validation-first principles that had transformed my brother's struggling startup. Yet the most profound expansion remained the one least visible. To outside observers, the transformation of a family system that had constrained all of us in different ways. What had begun as a confrontation of dysfunctional patterns had expanded into a new model of relationship, one based on mutual respect, collaborative problem-solving, and genuine recognition of each person's unique contributions. The expansion had not erased our differences or eliminated all challenges. We still disagreed on specific strategies, emphasized different priorities, and occasionally fell back into old communication patterns during moments of stress. But these instances became opportunities for recalibration rather than reinforcement of limiting dynamics. We had expanded beyond the roles that had defined and constrained us for decades, creating space for continuous growth rather than static positioning. As I watched my father and brother set the table together, discussing refinements to the customer onboarding process for ClearPay's newest feature set, I reflected on how thoroughly our family narrative had been transformed. The father who once dismissed my business insight now actively sought it. The brother who had expected unearned support now created genuine value through disciplined execution. And I had expanded beyond the need to prove my worth through achievement alone, finding a more balanced identity that encompassed professional success without being defined exclusively by it. 18 months after my father first slid Michael's business plan across that Sunday dinner table, I found myself facing an unexpected challenge that would test the transformation our family had undergone. The Stockholm Sustainability Summit had invited me to lead a 3-day workshop on integrating environmental innovation with scalable business models. It was a significant professional honor that would require 2 weeks in Sweden, including preparation, time and follow-up meetings with European potential partners. The timing couldn't have been worse. ClearPay was 1 month away from closing its Series A funding round, $2 million that would fuel expansion into medium-sized business markets. Michael had been preparing for months, refining projections, and strengthening the company's position. Meanwhile, my father's consulting firm had landed a major client whose sustainable business transformation would begin the same week as the Stockholm Summit. Under our old family dynamic, the decision would have been predetermined. My commitments would be considered less important, more flexible, more appropriate to sacrifice for the real priorities represented by my father's and brother's endeavors. I would have either declined the Stockholm opportunity or attended with a cloud of guilt about abandoning family obligations during critical periods. The transformed dynamics we had cultivated were about to face their most significant stress, Test. The situation came to a head during a strategy meeting at Verda's headquarters. Michael, my father, and I had gathered to discuss ClearPay's final preparations for the funding round, part of our regular collaborative process, when I mentioned the scheduling conflict. The summit organizers just confirmed the dates, I explained, bringing up the calendar on the conference room display. I'll be in Stockholm from the 12th through the 26th, which overlaps with both the final investor presentations for ClearPay and the launch of Dad's new client engagement. I waited for the familiar responses, subtle guilt induction, reminders of family priorities, dismissal of my opportunity's significance compared to their needs. Instead, Michael and my father exchanged thoughtful glances before my brother spoke. "That's a major recognition of your methodology and Verda's impact," he said, genuine pride in his voice. "The Stockholm Sustainability Summit is incredibly selective about their workshop leaders." My father nodded agreement. "We'll need to adjust our schedules and support plans accordingly. The ClearPay investor presentations can't be rescheduled, but we can reconfigure how we handle the preparation and follow-up." I studied their faces carefully, searching for signs of the old patterns, hidden resentment, performative support, masking expectations of compliance with their priorities. Instead, I found authentic consideration of how to accommodate all three significant opportunities rather than automatic assumption that mine should be sacrificed. "I've been thinking about how we might approach this," Michael continued, pulling up a document on his tablet. "I've drafted a revised preparation timeline for the investor presentations that front-loads your involvement, Eliza. If we intensify our collaborative sessions over the next 2 weeks, we can cover everything that requires your direct input before you leave for Stockholm." My father leaned forward, building on Michael's suggestion. "And I can adjust the initial phase of the client engagement to focus on elements that don't require coordination with Verda's incubator program. The sustainability assessment can proceed while you're away, with the integration planning shifting to after your return." This thoughtful, solutions-oriented approach, considering interdependencies and creating adaptive plans rather than demanding sacrifice from one party, represented the culmination of our transformation over the past 18 months. The challenge wasn't triggering regression to old patterns, but instead activating the new capabilities we had developed. Collaborative problem-solving, recognition of each person's professional value, and genuine desire for mutual success rather than competitive positioning. "I appreciate this approach," I acknowledged, emotion briefly thickening my voice. In the past, I might have just declined the Stockholm invitation rather than creating this scheduling challenge. "Which would have been a significant loss," my father replied, surprising me with his vehemence. "The European sustainable business community needs exposure to the Bradshaw framework. Their regulatory environment creates different innovation constraints than we face here. Your methodology could help bridge those gaps." The fact that my father, who had once dismissed my business plan without reading beyond the executive summary, now advocated for the global relevance of my methodology, represented perhaps the most profound marker of our transformation. We spent the next hour developing a comprehensive plan to address the scheduling challenges. Michael and I would double our ClearPay strategy sessions over the following 2 weeks, completing the investor presentation preparation before my departure. My father would restructure his client engagement to focus on assessment phases during my absence. The Verda team would handle ongoing incubator program operations with remote input from me as needed. As we concluded the meeting, I noticed something remarkable. None of us had approached the challenge from a perspective of competing priorities requiring sacrifice. Instead, we had engaged in genuine problem-solving that respected each person's professional commitments and sought to optimize outcomes for everyone involved. The preparation period unfolded according to our adjusted plan, with intensified collaboration that actually strengthened ClearPay's investor materials. Michael's presentation skills had developed significantly over the past year. Working together, On compressed timelines, we refined the company narrative to emphasize both the technical innovations and the structured development methodology that had produced them. My father, meanwhile, approached his client engagement with a flexibility I had never witnessed in his previous business operations. Rather than imposing his predetermined consulting framework on the client's situation, he adapted his approach to accommodate both their needs and the timing constraints created by my Stockholm commitment. The night before my departure for Sweden, we gathered for dinner at my apartment, an informal celebration of the collaborative solution we had developed and successfully implemented. My mother, who had watched our transformation with quiet satisfaction over the past year and a half, raised her glass in a toast. "To challenges that reveal growth rather than trigger regression," she said, her eyes shining with pride as she looked around the table at her husband, son, and daughter, all so profoundly changed from the family dynamics that had prevailed for decades. The Stockholm Sustainability Summit exceeded my expectations. European business leaders, operating under stricter environmental regulations than their American counterparts, found the Bradshaw framework particularly valuable for developing innovation pathways that satisfied both commercial and regulatory requirements. Workshop sessions scheduled for 20 participants attracted nearly twice that number, with attendees standing along the walls rather than missing the content. During scheduled breaks, I checked in remotely with Michael and my father. ClearPay's investor presentations were proceeding extremely well, with term sheets from 3 different funding groups already under consideration. My father's client engagement had commenced successfully, with the assessment phase revealing even greater sustainability transformation potential than initially projected. On the 4th day of the summit, I received a video call from Michael. His expression combined excitement with something else, a kind of centered confidence I had never seen in him before our collaborative work on the ClearPay pivot. "We've accepted the funding offer from Meridian Ventures," he announced. $4.2 million at a $17 million pre-money valuation. Better terms than we projected, with fewer control provisions and a more aligned vision for growth trajectory. "That's outstanding," I replied, genuine pride warming my voice. "Your presentation skills have come so far in the past year." "It wasn't just the presentation," Michael responded, his tone reflective rather than boastful. "It was the substance behind it. The milestone-based development approach we've implemented provides much better risk management from the investor perspective." Meridian specifically cited the Bradshaw framework as a key factor in their decision. The validation was deeply satisfying, not just personal recognition, but confirmation that the methodology we had developed through our family transformation had genuine value recognized by sophisticated market participants. Later that same day, my father sent a detailed email about his client engagement, explaining how he had adapted the initial assessment phase based on insights from the Bradshaw framework. Rather than the generic business analysis he would have conducted in the past, he had integrated sustainability metrics with operational efficiency measures, creating a more comprehensive evaluation model that his client had enthusiastically embraced. "The approach you developed for ClearPay translates remarkably well to established companies seeking transformation," he wrote. "It provides structure without rigidity, accountability without micromanagement. I've learned more about effective consulting in the past year working with you and Michael than in the previous decade of practice." This acknowledgement that he had gained valuable professional insights from collaborating with his children rather than simply bestowing his wisdom upon us represented perhaps the most profound indicator of how thoroughly our family system had transformed. The real test of our transformation came during the second week of the summit, when an unexpected opportunity emerged. The European Commission's Sustainability Directorate, impressed by the workshop content, invited me to extend my stay by a week to consult on innovation frameworks for their upcoming grant program. It was a prestigious opportunity with potential continental impact, and it would further delay my return and involvement in both ClearPay's funding implementation and my father's client project. In the past, such a conflict would have generated significant tension. I would have felt torn between professional opportunity and family obligation, likely declining the commission's invitation to avoid disappointing my father and brother. The transformed dynamics we had cultivated were about to face another, more demanding challenge. I scheduled a video call with both Michael and my father, explaining the situation and the significance of the commission's invitation. Their response demonstrated how completely our family patterns had changed. "This is exactly the kind of platform the Bradshaw framework needs," my father said immediately, no hesitation or qualification in his voice. The Commission's grant programs influence sustainability initiatives across the EU. If they incorporate your methodology into their evaluation criteria, the impact could be exponential. Michael nodded agreement. "We've got the Meridian funding secured. The implementation planning can proceed with the team we've assembled. Your direct input can be incorporated when you return." Their immediate supportive response, prioritizing potential impact over personal convenience, recognizing professional opportunity rather than focusing on family obligation, confirmed that our transformation wasn't situational or superficial, but fundamental and durable. "I'll stay for the commission consultation," I decided, grateful for the freedom to make the choice based on potential impact rather than family dynamics. We can coordinate remotely on the most critical aspects of both projects. The extended European engagement proved even more significant than anticipated. The Commission not only incorporated aspects of the Bradshaw framework into their grant evaluation criteria, but also invited me to join their Sustainability Innovation Advisory Council, a 2-year appointment that would involve quarterly meetings in Brussels and ongoing consultation on European green business initiatives. When I finally returned home after nearly a month abroad, I found both ClearPay and my father's consulting project thriving despite my extended absence. Michael had successfully initiated the funding implementation, establishing the organizational infrastructure needed for the company's next growth phase. My father had completed the initial client assessment and developed a transformation roadmap that integrated sustainability principles with operational efficiency in ways he had never attempted before our family's collaborative evolution. The challenge had revealed something profound. Our transformation wasn't dependent on proximity or continuous reinforcement. It had become self-sustaining, embedded in new patterns of interaction and decision-making that could withstand separation and competing priorities without regression to previous dysfunctional dynamics. During my first Sunday back home, as we gathered for the family dinner that had once been the stage for my father's dismissal of my business ambitions, my mother observed this evolution with characteristic insight. "The most convincing evidence of genuine change," she noted as we enjoyed dessert on the patio, "is that you all functioned so effectively while separated. In the past, distance would have triggered old patterns, assumptions about priorities, resentments about availability, competition for recognition. Instead, you each thrived while supporting one another's success from afar." She was right. The challenge of competing priorities and physical separation hadn't weakened our transformation, but confirmed its durability. We had created not just new behaviors but new foundational perspectives. From hierarchical positioning to collaborative problem-solving, from zero-sum competition to mutual amplification, from rigid role definition to adaptive skill utilization. The challenge had revealed that our transformation was complete in the most meaningful sense. It had become our new normal, requiring no special effort or constant vigilance to maintain. We had not just changed our behaviors, we had evolved our understanding of success itself, from individual achievement at others' expense to collective advancement through mutual support. As the sun set beyond my parents' garden, casting golden light across faces that now reflected authentic connection rather than performative family roles, I recognized that we had achieved something far more valuable than business success. We had created a family system capable of nurturing each member's potential while strengthening collective bonds, a transformation that would continue to generate benefits long after specific ventures had run their course. The challenge had been met not by regression or compromise, but but by the application of new capabilities we had cultivated through months of intentional practice. What had once seemed impossible, genuine collaborative problem-solving across generations and perspectives, had become our default approach, resilient enough to withstand significant stress without fracturing. This was the true meaning of transformation, not a fragile new arrangement requiring constant maintenance, but a fundamental recalibration that became self-reinforcing through the superior outcomes it consistently produced. 2 years after my father asked me to fund my brother's failing startup, an extraordinary opportunity emerged that would test the depth of our transformation in unexpected ways. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office when my assistant announced an unscheduled visitor, Lawrence Chen, founder and CEO of Nexus Global, one of the world's largest packaging conglomerates. Lawrence had been a mythic figure in our industry. For decades, brilliant, intimidating, and known for aggressively acquiring promising companies. Meeting him had been a professional goal since my earliest days at Verda, but not like this. Not with him appearing unannounced at my office door, his reputation for corporate acquisitions preceding him like a shadow. "Ms. Bradshaw," he said, extending his hand as he entered. "I apologize for the unorthodox approach. Some conversations are better had directly, without the filters of executive assistants and formal meeting agendas." His presence was both magnetic and unsettling, the calculated informality of his business-casual attire contrasting with the intensity of his gaze. At 62, he had the energy of someone decades younger, coupled with the strategic patience of a seasoned corporate predator. "What brings you to Verda?" I asked, gesturing toward the sitting area by the windows rather than remaining behind my desk. Whatever this unexpected visit entailed, I wanted us on equal footing. Lawrence settled into an armchair, studying me with undisguised assessment. "I've been watching your company's development with interest. Your biodegradable polymer innovations have significant market potential. But what's most impressive is the organizational methodology you've developed. The Bradshaw framework represents a systematic approach to innovation that's rare in this industry." His knowledge of our internal processes was surprising. While we had published aspects of the framework through academic channels and industry conferences, its full implementation within Verda remained proprietary. "We're proud of both our products and our processes," I acknowledged cautiously, "though I'm curious how closely you've been monitoring them." A slight smile crossed his. "You're thoroughly enough to know I want them both. I'm here to discuss Nexus Global acquiring Verda technology." The directness of his approach was jarring, even as I recognized it as characteristic of his reputation. No preliminary discussions, no gradual relationship building, just an immediate move to his strategic objective. "We're not for sale," I replied automatically, the response I had given to previous acquisition inquiries from smaller players in the industry. "Everyone has a price, Ms. Bradshaw," Lawrence countered, completely unfazed. "Mine is $700 million, all cash, with a 3-year earnout structure for key executives, including yourself." The figure momentarily stole my breath. Verda's most recent valuation had been just under $400 million. Lawrence was offering a premium that would be difficult for any CEO to dismiss outright, particularly one with fiduciary responsibilities to investors and shareholders. "That's a generous valuation," I acknowledged, maintaining my composure despite the internal shock. "But Verda is more than a financial asset to me. We're implementing a vision for sustainable packaging that's just beginning to realize its potential." Lawrence nodded as if expecting this response. "Which is precisely why I want to acquire you now, before that potential drives your valuation even higher. But let me be clear. I'm not interested in absorbing your technology and discarding your organization. I want the Bradshaw framework implemented across Nexus Global's entire innovation division." This was unexpected. Most corporate acquisitions in our industry focused on technology or market share, with organizational approaches typically discarded in favor of the acquirer's established Methods. Lawrence was suggesting something different, an acquisition that valued our methodology as much as our products. I'd need to discuss this with my board and executive team, I said, buying time to process the implications. And I have family considerations as well. Of course, Lawrence replied, standing to signal the conversation's conclusion. I'll have my team send over a formal letter of intent with the complete terms. Take 2 weeks to consider. After that, the offer expires. He handed me his card, an understated cream rectangle with only his name and a phone number. This is my personal line. Call me directly when you've made your decision. After he left, I sat motionless, staring at the Seattle skyline through my office windows. $700 million. Financial security beyond anything I had imagined when founding Verda. Recognition of our technological innovations and organizational methodology at the highest levels of global industry. Yet the opportunity carried profound implications beyond the financial windfall. If Nexus acquired Verda, I would no longer be an independent CEO but an executive within a massive corporate structure. The intimate connection between decision-making and implementation that had defined our company would inevitably change. Most importantly, the family transformation we had achieved, with my father and brother now integrally involved in various aspects of Verda's operations, would face its greatest test. That evening, I called an emergency family meeting at my parents' home. As we gathered around the kitchen island, the formal dining room table now reserved for actual dining rather than business discussions, I explained Lawrence Chen's unexpected visit and extraordinary offer. $700 million, my father repeated, clearly stunned despite his decades of business experience. That's a valuation multiple that defies industry norms. It's not just about the technology, I explained. Chen specifically mentioned the Bradshaw framework as a key factor in his interest. He wants to implement it across Nexus Global's innovation division. Michael leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. That's the methodology we developed together for ClearPay, expanded to Verda's operations and the incubator program. He's essentially placing significant value on our family's collaborative approach to business development. My mother, always perceptive about the human dimensions beneath business transactions, asked the crucial question. What would this mean for all of you? For the ways you've learned to work together? This was the heart of the matter. Over the past 2 years, our family had built something more valuable than successful individual businesses. We had created an ecosystem of mutual support and collaborative innovation that transcended traditional corporate boundaries. My father's consulting firm had integrated aspects of the Bradshaw framework into its client engagements. ClearPay had evolved in continuous dialogue with Verda's development processes. The incubator program connected all these elements in a structure that leveraged our complementary strengths. If I accept Chen's offer, I acknowledged, these relationships would inevitably change. I'd be an executive within Nexus Global, with responsibility for implementing our methodology across their operations. My autonomy would be significantly reduced. And the earn-out structure would likely include non-compete provisions, my father added, drawing on his extensive M&A experience. You probably couldn't continue your involvement with ClearPay or the incubator program during that period. Michael nodded, understanding the implications. Essentially, the very collaborative system we've built, the one that attracted Chen's interest in the first place, would be disrupted by accepting his offer. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The transformative family dynamics we had developed following my father's inappropriate request 2 years earlier had created such effective business methodologies that a global corporation was willing to pay a premium to acquire them, yet doing so would likely undermine the ongoing collaboration that made them so valuable. There's another consideration, my father said after a thoughtful silence. Chen's interest validates something I've only recently come to fully appreciate. What we've created together has value far beyond any individual business success. The Bradshaw framework isn't just a methodology for product development. It's an approach to collaborative innovation that could potentially transform entire industries. Coming from my father, who had once dismissed my business plan without reading beyond the executive summary, this recognition of our collective creation's significance represented the culmination of our family's transformation. The question isn't just whether to accept Chen's offer, he continued. It's whether selling to Nexus Global is the most effective way to expand the impact of what we've built together. This reframing shifted the entire conversation. Rather than focusing solely on the financial windfall or the constraints of corporate acquisition, we began exploring alternative approaches to scaling our methodology's influence while preserving the collaborative ecosystem that generated it. For the next several hours, we engaged in the kind of generative problem-solving that had become our family's hallmark. Michael suggested creating a formal institute dedicated to teaching and implementing the Bradshaw framework across multiple industries. My father proposed a holding company structure that would maintain independent operations while creating clearer connections between our various business entities. I outlined potential strategic partnerships that might achieve global scale without surrendering organizational autonomy. As midnight approached, my mother, who had been quietly observing our animated exchange, offered her own insight. What strikes me most isn't the specific solution you'll eventually develop, but how you're approaching this opportunity. 2 years ago, a decision of this magnitude would have triggered competition for influence, hierarchical positioning, and individual agenda advancement. Now you're genuinely collaborating to find an approach that honors everyone's contributions while maximizing collective impact. Her observation crystallized something important. The true value of our transformation wasn't just the specific methodology we had developed, but our capacity to navigate complex decisions through authentic collaboration rather than power dynamics or rigid roles. Over the following days, our exploration continued, while my executive team and board conducted their own evaluation of Chen's offer. Financial advisors confirmed the exceptional premium represented by the $700 million valuation. Legal counsel identified potential constraints in the proposed earnout structure. Industry analysts assessed the strategic fit between Verda and Nexus Global. All these inputs were valuable, but the most significant factor in my decision-making process remained the potential impact on the collaborative ecosystem our family had built. The financial windfall would be life-changing, but at what cost to the relationships and processes that had generated our greatest innovations? A week after Lawrence Chen's visit, I invited my father and brother to join me for a working session at Verda's headquarters. Together, we outlined an alternative to outright acquisition, a structured partnership proposal that would provide Nexus Global with access to our methodology and technology while preserving Verda's independence and our family's collaborative ecosystem. The proposal included a minority investment from Nexus at a still premium valuation, licensing of specific polymer technologies for non-competing applications, and a consulting arrangement to implement the Bradshaw framework within their innovation division. This approach would generate significant capital for Verda's expansion while maintaining our autonomous decision-making and preserving the cross-entity collaboration that had become our greatest strength. Chen might reject this counter-proposal entirely, my father cautioned as we reviewed the final document. He's known for getting what he wants, not compromising. Then we continue on our current path, I replied with newfound clarity. What we've built together is too valuable to sacrifice for even $700 million, if doing so would undermine the collaborative system that generated that value in the first place. Michael nodded agreement. The opportunity isn't the acquisition offer. It's the validation that our approach has global significance beyond our current scale. Whether Chen accepts our counter-proposal or not, we now have confirmation that the Bradshaw framework represents something truly innovative in business methodology. This perspective, focusing on validation and potential impact rather than immediate financial return, reflected how profoundly our family's approach to business had transformed. 2 years earlier, when my father asked me to fund my brother's failing startup, our interactions had been defined by entitlement, dismissal, and hierarchical positioning. Now we were collectively assessing a $700 million opportunity through the lens of sustainable value creation rather than individual gain. The day before Lawrence Chen's deadline, I called the number on his cream business card. His assistant put me through immediately. "I've been looking forward to your call, Ms. Bradshaw," he said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone unaccustomed to rejection. "I trust you're ready to move forward with our offer." "I have a counter-proposal," I replied, maintaining equal confidence despite the audacity of rejecting his extraordinarily generous terms. "One that provides Nexus Global with the benefits you're seeking while preserving elements of Verda's operations that are essential to our continued innovation." A lengthy silence followed, so extended that I momentarily wondered if the connection had failed. Finally, Lawrence spoke, his tone revealing genuine surprise. "Most executives presented with a premium acquisition offer focus exclusively on negotiating better financial terms or leadership positions. You're the first to counter with an entirely different structural approach. The Bradshaw framework you find so valuable emerged from a collaborative ecosystem that would be disrupted by traditional acquisition," I explained. "Our counterproposal preserves that ecosystem while still providing Nexus Global with access to our technology and methodology." "Send it over," he directed, his businesslike tone returning. "I'll review it personally and respond within 48 hours. As I hung up, I realized that regardless of Lawrence Chen's decision, the opportunity had already delivered its most significant benefit. Confirmation that our family's transformation had created something of extraordinary value. Whether through acquisition, strategic partnership, or continued independent growth, the collaborative methodology we had developed would continue to expand its impact. The opportunity wasn't the $700 million offer. It was the validation that our greatest innovation wasn't a sustainable polymer formula or a financial technology platform. It was the framework for collaborative value creation that had emerged from transforming dysfunctional family dynamics into generative professional relationships. 2 years after my father dismissively asked me to fund my brother's failing startup, we had built something that one of the world's most successful business leaders considered worth acquiring at a premium valuation. Not because of individual brilliance or exceptional luck, but because we had transformed conflict into collaboration, competition into complementary contribution, and hierarchical positioning into mutual amplification. The true opportunity wasn't Lawrence Chen's acquisition offer. It was the opportunity we had already seized to transcend limiting family patterns and create something more valuable than any of us could have built alone. 48 hours after submitting our counterproposal to Lawrence Chen, I received a response that defied the conventional wisdom about his negotiating style. Rather than rejecting our alternative outright or countering with minor modifications to his original acquisition offer, he requested a full-day working session with me, my father, and Michael at Nexus Global's Seattle headquarters. Chen never meets with potential acquisition targets personally until final terms are agreed upon, my father noted as we prepared for the meeting. Having all three of us there suggests he's genuinely intrigued by our collaborative approach. The Nexus Global corporate campus projected power through understated elegance. 5 glass buildings surrounding a central courtyard with sustainable landscaping and renewable energy infrastructure subtly integrated into the design. As we were escorted to the executive floor, I noticed how employees responded to Lawrence's presence in the hallways. Respectful without being deferential, engaged without being performative. He had cultivated an organizational culture that reflected his reputation for demanding excellence while valuing substantive contribution over hierarchical positioning. The conference room where we gathered featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, with sailing vessels and cargo ships moving across the water, a fitting metaphor for the blend of agility and scale that characterized successful, Modern enterprises. Lawrence had assembled a small team of his most senior executives, his chief innovation officer, general counsel, and chief financial officer. "Thank you for considering our counterproposal," I began. Once introductions were complete, we believe it creates sustainable value for both organizations while preserving the ecosystem that generated the innovations you're interested in acquiring. Lawrence nodded, his expression revealing nothing. Before discussing specific terms, I'd like to better understand something fundamental: the transformation that created the Bradshaw framework. My due diligence revealed that 2 years ago, none of you were collaborating professionally. Now you've developed a methodology so effective that companies across multiple industries are adopting it. What changed? The question cut straight to the heart of our journey. Not the technical aspects of the framework, but the human transformation that had made it possible. My father, Michael, and I exchanged glances, silently determining who should respond. In our old family dynamic, my father would have automatically claimed the storyteller role, regardless of whose experience was being shared. Now he gestured subtly for me to take the lead. It began with a confrontation, I explained, deciding that authentic transparency would serve us better than a sanitized corporate narrative. My father asked me to provide emergency funding for my brother's struggling startup, the same brother whose business concept he had enthusiastically supported, after dismissing my own business plan years earlier without reading beyond the executive summary. Lawrence's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised by the candor. His executive team shifted uncomfortably, unused to such direct acknowledgement of family friction in a business context. Instead of simply refusing, which would have been emotionally satisfying but ultimately unproductive, I offered structured support combined with substantive guidance, I continued. That intervention evolved into a methodology for milestone-based development that emphasized validation before scaling, customer problems before technological solutions, and actual progress metrics rather than vanity statistics. My father leaned forward, adding his perspective with a humility that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. What Eliza isn't saying explicitly is that the transformation began with my recognition that I had been fundamentally wrong, not just about her business potential, but about effective development methodology in general. The framework that now bears our family name emerged from my daughter teaching me approaches that contradicted much of what I had practiced throughout my consulting career. Michael picked up the narrative thread naturally, our family having developed a fluid collaborative communication style through countless strategy sessions. The framework continued evolving as we applied it to my fintech company, ClearPay. What began as emergency intervention became systematic methodology as we identified patterns that worked consistently across different business contexts and development stages. As we explained the progressive refinement of the Bradshaw framework, from crisis response to comprehensive methodology, I observed Lawrence's expression shifting from polite interest to genuine engagement. His questions became increasingly specific, exploring not just the technical elements of our approach, but the collaborative dynamics that generated them. "What you've described is remarkable," he said finally, after nearly 2 hours of in-depth discussion. "Not just the methodology itself, which we've already determined has exceptional value, but the transformation that produced it. You've evolved from dysfunctional family dynamics to complementary professional collaboration in ways that directly contradict conventional patterns." He turned to his executive team. "This is precisely why a traditional acquisition won't achieve our objectives. The Bradshaw framework isn't merely a documented methodology that can be purchased and implemented. It's an emergent property of transformed relationships and collaborative processes." This assessment, coming from someone renowned for aggressive corporate acquisition rather than philosophical business reflection, stunned his executives as much as it validated our own understanding of what we had created. "What are you suggesting?" Lawrence, his chief innovation officer, asked cautiously. A hybrid approach, he replied, his strategic mind visibly recalibrating in real time. Something between our original acquisition offer and the Bradshaw's counter-proposal. We need more than licensing and consulting. We need active integration with their collaborative ecosystem without destroying the conditions that make it function effectively. What followed was the most extraordinary negotiation I had ever experienced. Rather than positioning adversarially across the table, we rearranged the conference room to create a collaborative workspace. For the remainder of the day, we developed a completely novel business arrangement. Neither traditional acquisition nor conventional strategic partnership, but an integrated ecosystem model that preserved autonomy while creating structured collaboration. The final framework included 5 key components: a significant minority investment from Nexus Global in Verda at a premium valuation, creation of a joint research institute focused on sustainable packaging innovations, implementation of the AFO Bradshaw framework across Nexus Global's innovation division with ongoing guidance from our family team, integration of ClearPay's financial technology into Nexus Global's international operations, and establishment of an expanded incubator program jointly funded by both companies. As evening approached and our legal teams began formalizing the conceptual framework we had developed, Lawrence pulled me aside while the others were engaged in technical discussions. "I've been acquiring companies for over 30 years, he said quietly. I've never encountered a situation where I entered negotiations seeking full acquisition and concluded believing a collaborative ecosystem was demonstrably superior. The transformation your family has undergone, from hierarchical dysfunction to generative partnership, represents something far more valuable than even your innovative technologies." His recognition of the human dimension beneath the business methodology reflected an evolution in his own thinking. From seeing companies primarily as assets to be acquired to understanding the value of transformed relationships and collaborative processes that couldn't be simply purchased and absorbed. When we finally concluded the marathon session, all participants recognized that we had created something unprecedented. A business arrangement that valued relationship quality and collaborative dynamics as much as technical innovation and market positioning. The legal documents would require weeks to finalize, but the conceptual framework represented a breakthrough in how complementary organizations could interact without one consuming the other. As we left Nexus Global's headquarters that evening, my father expressed what all 3 of us were feeling. 2 years ago, I asked you to write a check to save your brother's failing startup. Today, we negotiated a transformative business arrangement with one of the world's most successful corporate leaders, not as subordinates or acquisition targets, but as valued collaborators with methodology he recognizes as revolutionary. Michael nodded agreement. And not despite our family connection, but because of how we transformed it from limitation to asset. The weeks that followed brought intense activity as we developed detailed implementation plans for our unprecedented arrangement with Nexus Global. The legal team struggled to create documentation for a business relationship that didn't fit established categories, neither acquisition nor joint venture nor strategic alliance, but a hybrid model that preserved autonomy while creating structured interdependence. Meanwhile, our family continued refining the Bradshaw framework itself, incorporating insights from the Nexus Global negotiation into the core methodology. The experience had revealed something important. The framework wasn't a static formula, but an evolving approach that gained power through application across diverse contexts. 3 months after our initial meeting with Lawrence Chen, we gathered for the formal signing ceremony at a neutral location, the botanical garden where I had often sought respite during Verda's challenging early days. The setting symbolized the sustainable growth orientation that united our organizations despite their different scales and histories. As reporters gathered for the press conference following the signing, Lawrence surprised everyone by inviting my father, Michael, and me to join him at the podium rather than making the announcement himself. Another departure from his typical approach to corporate communications. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.